The satellite saw it first. At 03:47 Eastern Standard Time, 17 independent tracking arrays NORAD, ESA, 3 private aerospace firms, and a Stark Industries orbital array that Tony Stark had built specifically to catch things the government wouldn't tell him about, registered the same impossible event within 4 seconds of each other. A tear in the fabric of local space, roughly geosynchronous, radiating an energy signature that matched nothing in any known classification system. Then it wasn't a tear anymore. It was a fleet. Tony Stark was awake before Friday finished the alert. "Talk to me," he said, already moving, already half into the newest mark as the nanite lattice crawled up his forearms. "Boss, I'm reading 41 vessels of unknown origin," Friday said, her voice carrying the particular flatness she used when even she didn't have a frame of reference. "Largest object is approximately 1900 meters. For scale, that's longer than the Chrysler Building is tall. Energy readings are off every scale I have." "That's not off every scale, Friday, that's off scales nobody's invented yet." Tony's HUD lit with a wireframe reconstruction, and for a moment, just a moment, Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, man who had personally punched a god, felt something he hadn't felt since a wormhole opened over this same city and spat out an army. He felt small. The wedge-shaped silhouette rotating into view over Manhattan was a mile long. It did not hover so much as asterisk gloom, blotting out the pre-dawn stars, its underside a lattice of running lights arranged with a discipline that felt less like technology and more like doctrine. 90 seconds later, every Avenger with a working comm line had the same image on their screen. Steve Rogers was already dressed. Some instinct that had survived ice, war, and 70 years of sleep told him this wasn't a drill, wasn't a training exercise, wasn't Loki being dramatic again. He hit the compound's emergency channel. "This is Rogers, everyone topside now, I don't care what you were doing." Natasha Romanoff arrived at the strategy room already reading 3 tablets at once, her hair still damp. "Talk fast, Steve, what am I looking?" "Don't know yet." That admission cost him. Steve Rogers had spent his whole life being the man with a plan, and right now he had nothing but a live feed of something the size of a small city hanging over the largest population center in the country. Bruce Banner's voice crackled in overcoms, distracted, the way it got when his brain was running 4 calculations simultaneously. "The energy signature isn't anything in the electromagnetic spectrum I recognize. It's not gamma, it's not tesseract adjacent, it's not Pym particle displacement. Whatever's powering that thing, it didn't come from any physics we've cataloged." "Helpful," Natasha said. "I'm working on it." Above the city, the great ship's underside split open. It did not explode, it did not roar. It simply unfolded, asterisk, geometric and precise. Thousands of individual shapes disgorging from the mothership's belly in perfect formation, smaller wedge-shaped craft, and beneath them larger transports descending in orderly ranks like a printing press stamping out identical soldiers. Which, as it turned out, was not far from the truth. The city noticed before the government did. Traffic cameras in Midtown captured commuters stopping mid-crosswalk, necks craned upward, phones raised. A construction worker on a half-finished high-rise on 53rd Street would later tell a reporter that the first thing he thought, staring up at the descending fleet, was that it looked religious, asterisk, like something out of a painting of the end of the world, all cold silver and terrible order. Then the screaming started, and it stopped looking like a painting and started looking like what it was. The first Imperial landing craft touched down in Central Park at 04:12, crushing an entire grove of maple trees under repulsor thrust that flattened grass in a 100-meter radius. The ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, and out marched soldiers in white armor, rifles already raised, moving with the kind of drilled precision that made human military formations look improvisational by comparison. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. A stormtrooper platoon commander, designation TK-4471, though no one on Earth would ever learn that, raised a gloved fist, and 40 troopers fanned into a perimeter with the wordless efficiency of a machine executing its only subroutine. The first civilian to approach them, a jogger in Central Park who had mistaken the whole thing for a viral marketing stunt, was zip-tied and marched toward a holding pen before he'd finished asking what studio was filming this. By 04:26 more landing sites had been established across the 5 boroughs. By 0435, Imperial forces had taken up defensive positions around 3 bridges, the stock exchange, and with a specificity that would later feel less like coincidence and more like reconnaissance, the block containing Stark Tower. That last part was what told Tony this wasn't random. They know who we are, he said, watching the tactical display update in real time. Or they know what we are. Look at the deployment pattern. That's not carpet bombing a city, that's a siege plan. Against who? Sam Wilson's voice came through, clipped, already airborne, wings extended as he banked over the East River to get eyes on the nearest landing zone. Against us, genius Birdman, against anything that might fight back. Steve was already moving toward the jet. Then we don't give them the satisfaction of guessing right. Avengers, this is a call to arms. I want eyes on every landing site, non-lethal engagement until we know what we're dealing with, and somebody get Fury on the horn even though I'm 90% sure he already knows and just didn't call us. New, Natasha confirmed, scanning an encrypted feed. Shields had partial tracking on the anomaly for 6 hours. They were running it up the chain when it stopped being an anomaly and started being an invasion. Of course they were, Sam muttered. The first real confrontation happened in Central Park, and it happened fast. Wanda Maximoff arrived on the perimeter in a burst of crimson energy, hovering above the trampled grass, staring down at the white-armored ranks below her with something between confusion and cold calculation. She had fought gods. She had unmade minds. She had, on one particularly bad Tuesday, briefly held the fate of reality in her hands. She did not know what these things were, and that alone made her cautious. "Stand down," she called out, voice amplified by a thread of power, "or I will make you stand down." Response was not a word. It was a volley of blaster fire, red bolts lanced toward her, and here was the first genuine surprise of the war. The detail that would end up in 1,000 after-action reports on both sides. The bolts weren't bullets. They didn't move like anything Wanda had trained her reflexes against. They were fast, faster than she expected, searing lines of superheated plasma that didn't arc or drop. They simply arrived asterisk. She threw up a hex shield on instinct, and the first blaster bolt hit it and stopped. Absorbed, dispersed, the crimson energy flaring bright as it ate the shot's momentum. Wanda felt the impact land somewhere behind her sternum, a strange resonance, like her power had bitten into something it didn't fully recognize but could still chew. Asterisk interesting, asterisk she thought, and then didn't have time to think anything else because 40 more shots followed the first. She scattered the platoon with a single contemptuous gesture, crimson energy sweeping through their ranks and hurling white-armored bodies into the trees. But as the dust cleared, she registered something that unsettled her more than the fight itself. They got back up. Bruised, disoriented, weapons scattered, but alive, moving, regrouping on some unheard command, already falling back into formation with a discipline that felt less like courage and more like conditioning. "These aren't giving up," she reported over comms, breathing harder than she expected to. "There's a lot more of them and they don't run." Across the river, Sam Wilson discovered something else entirely. He'd been tracking a landing craft near the Manhattan Bridge, staying high, staying fast, doing recon rather than engagement, until a shape detached from the escort formation and came for him. Not a soldier. A fighter craft, small, fast, twin-winged, moving with an aerial agility that made his enhanced reflexes feel suddenly uncomfortably human. "A cap, I've got a bogey and it is asterisk fast." The TIE fighter's cannons lit up the pre-dawn sky and Sam broke hard right, wings folding and reopening in a maneuver that had saved his life a dozen times against conventional aircraft. It wasn't enough. The fighter matched him turn for turn, and only a last-second dive into the shadow of the bridge's suspension cables saved him from a shot that vaporized a support strut 6 feet from his head. "Correction," he gasped, leveling out over the water, heart hammering. "These guys fly better than I do." That is a sentence I did not think I'd say today. Red Wing detached and looped back, providing a targeting solution, and Sam used the split-second opening to put 3 shots from his own weapons into the fighter's wing. It spun off, smoking, and Sam allowed himself half a second of satisfaction before 3 more fighters banked in from the fleet above. "Need backup on the East River, and I need it now asterisk." It was Rhodey who found the pattern first, because Rhodey had spent enough years in actual militaries to recognize one when he saw it, even one from somewhere that apparently wasn't Earth. "This is a beachhead," he said, War Machine's targeting systems chewing through drone footage in real time as he hovered above the financial district, watching Imperial walkers, 4-legged transports the height of a 2-story building, stomp down Wall Street with a mechanical arrogance that made the NYPD barricades look like a child's toy fence. They're not trying to level the city. Look at the formation. They're establishing control points. Comms, transit, financial infrastructure. This is occupation doctrine. Occupation implies they think they're staying, Tony said, voice tight, already redirecting a swarm of drones toward the Walker column. Yeah, hey, that's the part I don't love. First ATSD reached the intersection of Wall and Broad and simply stopped. And a voice, modulated, flat, carrying with an authority that needed no volume to be terrifying, broadcast from external speakers in a language the city's translation software choked on for 11 full seconds before rendering into something approximating English. Citizens of this world. You are now under the protection and jurisdiction of the Galactic Empire. Resistance is inadvisable. Compliance ensures your safety. Rhodey stared at the readout of that translated sentence for a long moment. Galactic Empire, he repeated. Tony, please tell me your sensors are as confused as I am. My sensors, Tony said, just told me those things are broadcasting from somewhere with a word for galactic that isn't metaphorical. Friday, run every star chart we've got. I want to know if galactic means what I think it means. Running now, boss. Preliminary spectral analysis of the mothership's drive signature suggests point-to-point travel across interstellar, possibly intergalactic distances. I don't have a frame of reference for the propulsion method. It isn't warp, it isn't wormhole-based like the Bifrost, and it isn't anything in Dr. Foster's research. It's not from around here, Tony muttered. Great, awesome, love that for us. Walker's forward cannon tracked, unhurried, toward a cluster of NYPD cruisers that had made the mistake of setting up a perimeter half a block too close, and Rhodey didn't wait to find out what compliance ensures your safety meant in practice. War Machine's shoulder-mounted launchers fired in a coordinated burst, and the Walker's leg joint erupted in a spray of sparks and alloy, sending the massive machine listing sideways into a parked delivery truck. It didn't fall. It staggered, servos whining, and pivoted its remaining weapons toward Rhodey with a speed that suggested the pilot inside was neither panicked nor particularly impressed. Okay, Rhodey said, banking hard as return fire chewed through the air where he'd been half a second earlier. These things can take a hit. By 0500, less than an hour after the fleet's arrival, the picture had crystallized into something that made even Nick Fury, a man who had personally briefed presidents on extraterrestrial incursions, alien scepters, and a Norse god's estranged brother, go quiet on the comm line for 4 full seconds before responding. Talk to me, Cap. They're organized, they're disciplined, and there's a lot of them, Steve said, watching from a rooftop as Imperial forces consolidated their hold on 3 separate landing zones with the calm efficiency of soldiers executing a plan they'd rehearsed 1,000 times. This isn't Loki's army. That was chaos with a leash. This is a machine. Every unit knows exactly what it's supposed to do. Numbers, I don't know yet. Every time we clear one landing zone, sensors pick up more incoming. Whatever's still up in that ship, it's not running low. Fury exhaled, and even over comms, Steve could hear him doing the math that every soldier in history had done at some point. The math of a fight that might not be winnable by force alone. Shields activating every asset we've got, and I'm calling in favors I didn't know I still had. Hold what you can hold, don't die doing it. The Avengers were not, it turned out, alone in resisting, though it would take hours for that fact to fully register. Ordinary New Yorkers, the kind who had grown almost blasé about alien invasions after a decade of increasingly strange news cycles, were doing what ordinary people always did when the world went sideways. They were helping each other. A bodega owner in Chinatown hid 11 strangers in his walk-in freezer when Imperial patrols swept the block. A subway conductor held a train 2 extra minutes at a platform, doors open, screaming for people to get on, just get on, even as blaster fire chewed through the tile behind him. It was one of these ordinary people, a paramedic named Miguel Reyes, 26 years old, 3 years on the job, currently dragging an unconscious stranger away from a collapsed scaffold near Union Square, who became, without either of them knowing it yet, the first thread in a friendship that would outlast the war itself. He didn't see Peter Parker swing down until the kid had already webbed a falling support beam and redirected it away from both of them. You good? The kid asked, voice cracking with the particular breathlessness of someone who was maybe 18 years old and absolutely should not have been anywhere near this fight. Yeah, I'm good thanks to you. Miguel stared at the red and blue figure crouched on the wreckage, then up at the sky where something the size of an aircraft carrier was still disgorging troops. You're Spider-Man. Little bit, yeah. Peter's head tilted, taking in the scene the frightened crowd, the paramedic still gripping the unconscious man's collar, the distant crack of blaster fire. You should get people underground. Subway, parking garage, anywhere with a roof. These guys, I don't know what they are, but they're not messing around. Are they? Working on it, Peter said, and then his spider-sense screamed, and he yanked Miguel sideways half a second before a stray shot turned the spot they'd been standing into a smoking crater. Miguel said, voice several octaves higher than before. Okay, underground, got it moving. Peter watched him go, herding the stunned crowd toward the subway stairs with the calm competence of someone who did this, the keeping people alive asterisk thing, not the alien invasion thing, for a living, and felt something settle in his chest despite the chaos. That guy's got it together. I like that guy, asterisk. Then he swung off toward the sound of the nearest fight. Because 18-year-olds who dressed up as spiders didn't get the luxury of processing feelings mid-invasion, the confrontation that would end up defining the entire first day happened at 06:14, when Imperial forces attempted to secure the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Avengers, finally fully assembled for the first time since the fleet's arrival, decided that this specifically was the line. Steve led the charge across the bridge's pedestrian walkway, shield raised, Thor's absence a hole in the formation that everyone felt and no one mentioned. The god of thunder was 3,000 miles away in London, and burning every ounce of Asgardian magic Heimdall could muster to get home faster. Natasha and Clint flanked wide, picking off individual troopers with a precision that made up in economy what it lacked in raw power. Wanda hung back, learning the enemy's weapons with every exchange, building a mental catalog of exactly how much force it took to stop a blaster bolt cold. Bruce, greener by the minute, waited in reserve because everyone had agreed, Bruce included, that the Hulk was a last resort, not an opening move, against an enemy whose full capabilities remained unknown. Tony and Rhodey provided air cover, and it was Tony who first noticed the shift in Imperial tactics. Not falling back, he said, scanning the enemy formation as it reorganized under fire with unsettling calm. Look at that, they're adapting asterisk. 2 engagements in and they've already adjusted their spacing to account for area effect attacks. Friday, how fast is that kind of tactical adjustment supposed to happen? Not this fast, boss. Not without either exceptional training or a command structure processing battlefield data in real time. Great. So either they're really good, or someone up in that mothership is watching us fight and taking notes. Someone in question was watching, though not from the mothership, not directly. 200 miles above Earth's surface, in a command chamber aboard the Star Destroyer Ashen Providence asterisk. An Imperial officer with cold eyes and a colder voice studied a holographic tactical display and permitted himself the smallest flicker of genuine interest. They organize quickly for an undisciplined species, he said to the officer beside him. Casualties, within acceptable parameters, Commander. The energy manipulation entity is the primary concern. Standard blaster fire is being absorbed rather than penetrating. Then we adjust, redirect the second wave to heavier ordnance, and send word to the flagship. The commander's eyes didn't leave the display, where a crimson-cloaked figure had just detonated a squad of troopers with a gesture. Tell them this world may be worth more attention than the survey drones suggested. There is power here, undisciplined, unshaped, but real. On the bridge below, that power was currently the only thing standing between an Imperial infantry advance and the borough of Brooklyn, and it was starting to run thin. Steve, I'm not gonna lie to you. Clint's voice crackled over comms, an edge of genuine strain in it as he ducked behind a support cable to reload. I'm burning through arrows faster than I can make trick shots feel clever. We need a plan that isn't punch until they stop coming, because they are not stopping. Steve deflected 3 shots off his shield in as many seconds, feeling the impact rattle up his arm with more force than he expected. These weren't bullets. They hit like something angrier than physics usually allowed and made the only call he could make: fall back to the tower. Regroup, treat wounded, figure out what we're actually fighting. We're not losing this bridge today, but we're not winning the whole war in the next 10 minutes either. Copy that, Natasha said, already moving, covering Clint's withdrawal with 3 shots that dropped 3 troopers with the flat efficiency of someone who had never once needed a 4th. Fighting retreat, people, nobody's dying on this bridge today. They pulled back in good order, bruised, several of them bleeding. All of them rattled in a way none would fully admit until much later, and behind them, Imperial forces consolidated their hold on the bridge without pursuing. Which was, in its own way, more unsettling than a chase would have been. They didn't need to chase. They had time, numbers, and a fleet still hanging in low orbit like a held breath by mid-morning. The true scale of the situation had settled over the city like a shroud. 6 boroughs worth of infrastructure disrupted, casualties in the hundreds climbing, A fleet in orbit that showed no signs of leaving, reinforcing, or negotiating. And an Avengers roster that had, for the first time in longer than any of them liked to admit, genuinely questioned whether they were enough. They gathered in the shattered remains of the compound's strategy room, windows blown out from an earlier strafing run, monitors flickering on backup power, and Tony Stark, who rarely allowed himself to sound anything other than certain, said the thing everyone else had been thinking. "I don't know if we can win this one alone." Nobody argued with him. Steve looked out at the smoke rising over Manhattan, at the impossible silhouette still hanging in the sky like a verdict waiting to be delivered, and felt the particular familiar weight of a fight that was bigger than any one team. "Then we don't fight it alone," he said. "We call everyone, Wakanda, the Guardians, if Rocket's little space phone still works. Strange if he's not busy holding some other dimension together, whoever's left." Because if this is what a beachhead looks like, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Above the ruined city, deep in the belly of the Imperial fleet, new transports were already beginning to descend, and far to the south, sensors that had nothing to do with Earth's military detected a smaller, faster contingent breaking off from the main formation, and setting a course that could only be described in any language as purposeful. Wakanda's borders had just appeared on someone's scanners. And whoever was reading that data clearly liked what they saw. Wakanda's borders lit up on Imperial long-range scanners at 0922 local time, and by 0940, Shuri had already intercepted the sensor sweep, isolated its point of origin, and delivered the news to her brother with the particular calm she reserved for situations too large to panic about properly. "Scanning us," she said, fingers dancing across a holographic display that rendered the incoming Imperial contingent as a cluster of hard-edged blue triangles crossing the Serengeti at a speed that made no aerodynamic sense. 6 vessels, fast movers, not the big one from the news feeds. And brother, they slowed down when they hit our vibranium deposits, like something pinged their instruments and made them curious. Studied the display in silence for a long moment, the weight of a decision he'd hoped never to face settling onto his shoulders. Wakanda had spent 5,000 years hidden and 1 year visible, and in that 1 year of visibility it had already fought a mad Titan's army on its own soil. He had told himself after that Wakanda's isolation days were over for good. He had not expected the next test to arrive quite this fast. "Raise the shield," he said, full strength. "And get me every general we have." Vibranium dome that arced over Wakanda's capital had turned back conventional missiles, alien war beasts, and at least one attempted coup. It had never been tested against something that didn't originate from this galaxy, and as the Imperial scout craft slowed on approach, their sensors clearly registering an energy barrier that shouldn't have been possible for a Bronze Age, by their classification, civilization to produce, T'Challa allowed himself a single moment of grim satisfaction. Let them wonder what else we're hiding. The scout craft did not attack. They circled instead at a respectful distance, running scan after scan, and it was that restraint more than any show of force could have that told Okoye, standing at her king's side with her spear steady in her grip, exactly what kind of enemy this was. "They are not afraid," she said. "They are curious, that is worse." "Worse?" asked M'Baku, arriving at a jog with his contingent from the mountains, always ready for a fight and only slightly disappointed that this one hadn't started yet. "Because fear makes an enemy cautious," Okoye said. "Curiosity makes them patient, and patient enemies plan." Opened a channel, encrypted, routed through 3 relay satellites and 1 very illegal piece of Shuri-built hardware that technically violated at least 4 international telecommunications treaties, directly to the Avengers compound in New York. "Captain Rogers," he said when Steve's face resolved on the display, bruised and soot-streaked and clearly running on adrenaline and coffee in roughly equal measure. "I understand you're having a difficult morning, Majesty." Steve's relief at hearing a friendly voice was audible even through exhaustion. "We could use the difficult morning to be a shared one if Wakanda's willing. Wakanda has 6 Imperial scout craft currently circling our shield, apparently trying to determine whether our vibranium deposits are worth invading for. So yes, Captain, I believe our mornings are about to become very shared indeed." In New York, the strategy room had transformed in the 3 hours since the fighting retreat off the Brooklyn Bridge. Med Bay cots lined one wall, most occupied by injured civilians the Avengers had pulled from collapsed buildings rather than actual team members, small mercies, So far, though Clint's shoulder was wrapped tight enough that Natasha had confiscated his bow until a doctor cleared him. Every monitor that still worked displayed a different feed: satellite tracking of the Imperial fleet, news broadcasts running on a 45-second delay because every station kept cutting to commercial out of sheer editorial panic, and the one Bruce Banner hadn't looked away from in 20 minutes, a live feed of a captured stormtrooper helmet sitting on an examination table. "Talk to me, Bruce," Tony said, sliding into the room with a tray of coffee that nobody had asked for and everybody desperately needed. "What are we working with?" Bruce didn't look up from his tablet. "The helmet's polymer composite is unlike anything in our materials database. It's not vibranium grade, but it's engineered, mass-produced, standardized, built for a supply chain that assumes you're outfitting soldiers by the *million*, not the 1,000. Whoever makes this stuff isn't building an army. They're building an army manufacturing infrastructure. That's not ominous at all." "Not done." Bruce finally looked up, and the particular quality of dread in his expression made Tony's stomach drop before a word was said. "The rifle we recovered, the blaster I ran a partial teardown. The power cell isn't chemical, isn't nuclear, isn't anything from our periodic table's danger zone. It's using a compressed gas plasma hybrid that generates bolts through a firing mechanism so efficient it barely generates waste heat. Tony, this is consumer-grade * tech for them. This is what they hand to the guy at the very bottom of the chain of command." Tony set the coffee tray down very carefully, the way a man sets things down when his hands have started almost imperceptibly to shake. "So if that's the entry-level gear, then I don't want to know what the flagship's carrying," Bruce finished. Friday chimed in, unprompted, in the tone she used when she'd finished a calculation nobody had explicitly asked for, but that seemed relevant. "Boss, I've cross-referenced the propulsion signature from the mothership against every theoretical FTL framework in Dr. Foster's database, plus several Dr. Banner flagged as speculative and possibly insane. The closest analog is a hyperspace displacement model, essentially folding through a parallel dimension to bypass conventional distance. If accurate, this technology implies routine interstellar, possibly intergalactic travel as a baseline capability, not an experimental one. It's not that they found us," Rhodey said slowly, arms crossed, standing near the door with the stillness of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. "It's that finding us was easy. Like a Tuesday, a whole civilization out there casually hopping between galaxies, and we're just now the new planet on their map." Room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. It was Natasha who broke the silence because someone always had to, and it was usually her. "Then we stop treating this like an alien incursion and start treating it like first contact with a superpower. Which means intelligence gathering matters more than firepower right now. We need to know their command structure, their weaknesses, why they're here specifically, and what compliance actually means to them before we commit to an all-out war we might not be equipped to win." "Agreed," Steve said. "Which is why I want that stormtrooper we captured talking. The prisoner designation TK-2289, though he introduced himself to absolutely no one, sat in a reinforced holding cell 3 floors below the compound's main level, helmet removed, revealing a face that was, disappointingly and unsettlingly, entirely human. Young. Scared, though he was working hard not to show it. Somewhere in his mid-20s, with the kind of blank, institutional stare that suggested he'd been trained since childhood to have exactly this expression and no other, Natasha entered alone. That had been the plan: one person, no visible weapons, no threat posture. Fear made people either compliant or defiant, and defiance was useless to her. She needed talking *. "You've got a name," she said, settling into the chair across from him, voice conversational, almost bored. "Somewhere under that designation number, I mean, everybody's got one." Trooper said nothing. "That's fine, we've got time." She let the silence stretch, watching him not watch her, watching the way his hands, cuffed in front of him, kept curling and uncurling like he was fighting some deeply trained impulse to salute or stand at attention despite being seated in a cell. "You're a long way from home. Wherever home is, I'm guessing that's not something you get to think about much." Something flickered behind his eyes. "Small, human, there and gone. We're not going to hurt you," Natasha continued. "I know that's probably not what you were told to expect. I know compliance ensures your safety probably came with an unspoken or else that got applied to civilians on your side of things, not prisoners on ours. But that's not how we do this. You don't understand what you're fighting," the trooper said, finally, voice rougher than she expected, younger, too, once it wasn't being filtered through a helmet's vocoder. "This isn't a war you win. This is a war you *survive* if you're smart, and even that's not guaranteed. He studied her for a long moment, some calculation happening behind eyes that had clearly been trained to distrust everything and everyone. And then perhaps because he was tired, perhaps because some part of him that predated his conscription still existed and wanted quietly to matter to someone, he talked. He told her about the Empire. Not in strategic detail, he was a foot soldier, not a briefing officer, and clearly knew far less than the fear in the room suggested he should, but in scope. Thousands of worlds. A galaxy, not a solar system, under centralized rule. An emperor whose name he spoke with the particular flatness of someone who'd had loyalty trained into him rather than earned from him. Military apparatus so vast that the fleet currently sitting over New York represented, in his estimation, a asterisk reconnaissance and force action. Not the invasion. The asterisk opening bid, asterisk if this is the opening bid, Natasha said carefully, keeping her voice level though something cold had settled in her chest. What does the actual invasion look like? The trooper's silence this time said more than any answer could have. She left the cell 12 minutes later and found Steve waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, having listened to the entire exchange over comms. Reconnaissance in force, he repeated. That's the word he used, or the closest translation of it. This isn't the war, Steve. This is the Empire deciding whether we're worth a war. If we convince them we are. Natasha didn't have an answer for that, and neither, for a long moment, did he. The public relations catastrophe unfolding in parallel to the military crisis was, in its own way, almost as dangerous. By noon, every news network on the planet had abandoned any pretense of measured coverage, and cable panels populated by retired generals and astrophysicists who very obviously had no idea what they were looking at speculated wildly about alien invasion, government cover-ups, and inevitably, whether this was somehow the Avengers' fault for attracting this kind of attention in the first place. The president's address to the nation, delivered from a bunker whose location was, for the first time in the broadcast's history, not disclosed even to the network carrying it, did little to calm anything. Steve watched it from the compound, arms crossed, jaw tight, as the president spoke in the careful, hedging language of a leader who genuinely did not know if the country she governed still had sovereign control over its own airspace. And while the full scope of this incursion remains under assessment, I want to assure every American, every person watching this broadcast anywhere in the world, that we are working with every ally, every resource, and every extraordinary individual at our disposal to, she means us, Sam said from the corner, arm in a sling, watching with the particular weariness of someone who'd flown 3 sorties before breakfast. Extraordinary individuals. That's diplomat speak for the Avengers. Please don't let us die. She's not wrong to say it, Steve said. People need to hear that somebody's fighting for them, even if that somebody doesn't fully know what they're doing yet. Comforting. I didn't say it was comforting, I said it was true. It was Peter Parker off patrol, finally mask off, sitting cross-legged on a med bay cot with a bag of ice pressed to a bruise blooming along his ribs, who brought up the paramedic. There was this guy, he said, to no one in particular, though Steve was the one who turned to listen. Down in Union Square, EMT, he didn't run, everybody else was running, and this guy just kept helping people, even when the shooting started. Peter shifted the ice pack, wincing. I don't know, it felt like a good sign, that there's people down there doing the right thing even when it's terrifying. Made me feel less like the whole city's just gonna fall apart. Steve looked at the kid, 18 years old, exhausted, bruised, radiating an earnestness that 3 hours of alien invasion hadn't managed to burn out of him, and felt something in his chest ease just slightly for the first time all day. That's the fight underneath the fight, Steve said. The Empire's got ships and soldiers. We've got people who don't run. I'll take that trade. Peter didn't fully understand what Steve meant by it, not yet, but he'd remember the sentence. He'd remember, too, without quite knowing why, that he wanted to find that paramedic again. Not for the Avengers, not for the war, just to know that the guy who'd stood his ground while everyone else scattered was still standing. Tony's breakthrough came at 14:00 in the ruins of what had once been the compound's primary lab. Now half converted into a triage/workshop hybrid where Bruce's captured stormtrooper rifle sat disassembled across 3 separate workbenches. "Okay," Tony said, wiping grease off his hands, Friday's holographic schematics hovering over the dismantled weapon. "I think I understand the power cell. I do not understand the targeting computer, which is frankly insulting because I built JARVIS and now Friday out of spite and ambition, and this thing's targeting solution is running calculations I can't fully reverse engineer on a rifle a foot soldier carries." "You replicate it?" Rhodey asked. "Replicate? No, not on the timescale we've got. Adapt, maybe." Friday, pull up the compressed plasma discharge model. I want to see if we can retrofit something similar into the Iron Legion's existing weapons platforms. Won't be pretty, won't be elegant, but if it buys our automated units parity with their infantry-grade blasters, I'll take ugly. Running the retrofit simulation now, boss. Preliminary estimate, 40% power output improvement on existing repulsor tech if we adapt the compression principle. Full integration timeline, approximately 18 hours assuming no further attacks disrupt lab access. 18 hours we may not get, Tony muttered, but he was already moving, already 3 steps into a problem that, for the first time since the fleet had appeared over Manhattan, felt like something he could actually solve. That mattered more than he wanted to admit. Tony Stark did not do well feeling helpless. Give him a piece of alien tech to take apart though, and helpless turned into work, and work he could manage. Steve found him there an hour later, sleeves rolled up, 3 cups of cold coffee abandoned around him, and recognized the particular manic focus of a man using engineering as a substitute for processing fear. Bad is it, Steve said. Not a question really, Tony didn't look up from the schematic. Bad enough that I'm scared and I don't scare easy anymore. Steve, if the tech we pulled off a * grunt is this far ahead of anything we've got baseline access to, then whatever's flying that flagship is generations beyond us. We're not fighting an enemy army. We're fighting an enemy civilization, and it's been building weapons for longer than our species has had written language, if their propulsion tech's any indication. What do we do with that? We do what we always do. Tony finally looked up, and beneath the exhaustion, beneath the fear he just admitted to out loud, something stubborn and very Tony Stark settled into his expression. We get smarter, faster than they expect. We use everything we've got, Wakandan tech, strange as magic if we'll pick up the phone, whatever Thor drags home from Asgard, and we make ourselves too expensive to conquer. We can't outgun a Galactic Empire tonight, but maybe we can make tonight cost them more than they budgeted for. By late afternoon, the shape of Earth's resistance had begun, however roughly, to cohere. Wakanda's shield held its scoutcraft, visitors eventually withdrawing, not defeated, simply finished observing, which felt, if anything, more unsettling than a battle would have. T'Challa's forces mobilized quietly, preparing not for isolation but for the alliance Steve had proposed hours earlier. Shuri, meanwhile, had already begun cross-referencing Bruce's captured weapon data against Wakandan vibranium research, muttering something about, finally, a challenge that made her brother simultaneously proud and deeply concerned for his own city's structural integrity once his sister got creative. Sam Wilson, cleared for light duty against a doctor's strenuous objection, spent the afternoon doing something no strategist had explicitly assigned him, flying low over the city's shelters, checking on the ordinary people doing the extraordinary work of keeping each other alive. He found Miguel Reyes again near a makeshift medical station in a subway concourse, still working, still steady, coordinating 3 other paramedics with the calm authority of someone who'd apparently decided that the end of the world was simply an unusually bad shift. Still standing, Sam said, landing beside him, wings folding. So are you, Miguel said, not looking up from the wound he was dressing. Guessing that's the theme of the day. Guessing it is. Sam crouched to help hold a bandage in place, and for a moment, in the middle of a war neither of them had asked for, 2 very different kinds of hero worked in silence, side by side, doing the only thing either of them fully understood how to do, showing up. At the compound, as evening settled over a city that had spent its first full day under alien occupation, Steve Rogers stood at the shattered window of the strategy room, watching the Imperial fleet's running lights blink against the darkening sky like a constellation that didn't belong there, and allowed himself, finally, one honest, held, barely. But we held, it wouldn't be enough. He knew that with the same certainty he'd known, standing over a broken Bifrost 11 years ago, that the fight in front of him was only the first of many. Somewhere above the city, an empire was recalculating its assumptions about the backwater world that had refused to kneel on day one. Somewhere in Wakanda, an alliance was quietly taking shape. And somewhere in a dark laboratory, Tony Stark was still awake, still working, still trying to out-engineer a civilization with a head start measured in centuries. Steve's calm crackled, fury voice grim, carrying news that would define the shape of tomorrow's fight before tonight was even finished. Cap, you're gonna want to see this. Sensors just picked up a second wave breaking off from the main fleet, and this one's headed straight for Wakanda's border. Steve closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, gathering himself, and then opened them with the particular resolve of a man who had never once in his entire life chosen to stand down from a fight worth having. "The jet ready," he said. "We're going to Wakanda." The jet touched down inside Wakanda's outer perimeter at 21:14 local time, its VTOL thrusters kicking up a fine spray of red dust that hadn't settled before the ramp was already lowering. Steve was first down, shield on his back, followed by Natasha, Sam cleared for full duty against every rational medical objection, and Bruce, who'd insisted on coming despite everyone's quiet agreement that the Hulk was still very much a last resort. T'Challa met them on the landing pad himself, Okoye a half-step behind him. The Dora Milaje fanned out in a perimeter that had less to do with distrust of the Avengers and everything to do with the Second Imperial contingent currently registering on every Wakandan sensor array as it crossed into African airspace. "Captain," T'Challa said, clasping Steve's forearm. "I wish I could say it was good to see you under better circumstances." "Story of the week," Steve said. "What are we looking at?" 12 vessels, larger than the scout craft that visited us this morning. Troop transports based on their configuration, plus 2 of the walking machines your reports described from New York. T'Challa turned, leading them toward the command center buried beneath the palace, Shuri's voice already audible ahead, rattling off numbers to a room full of generals with the rapid-fire cadence of someone who had not slept and did not currently plan to. "They are not scanning anymore, Captain. They are approaching. I believe this morning's reconnaissance satisfied whatever curiosity your invasion sparked. Now they've come to collect." Shuri's command center was a marvel even by Wakandan standards. Holographic displays wrapping 360 degrees around a central dais, live feeds from a dozen satellites and 100 ground sensors compiling into a single tactical picture that made the Avengers' New York setup look, by comparison, like a chalkboard. "Brother," Shuri said, not looking up as they entered, "your Avengers are punctual." "I respect that in allies who are otherwise perpetually behind on their own paperwork, Shuri." T'Challa's voice carried a warning, though there was no real heat in it. "What's the approach vector?" "Due south, straight for the capital, no attempt at subtlety." "If I had to guess?" She finally turned, holographic light throwing sharp shadows across a face that was doing an admirable job of masking real fear beneath professional focus. "I'd say whoever's in command up there has decided our vibranium deposits are worth the fight. They want to know what's under our shield badly enough to test it." Natasha stepped forward, studying the tactical display with the flat, assessing calm of someone whose entire skill set was built around exactly this kind of high-stakes uncertainty. "What's our defensive posture?" "The shield holds against conventional ordnance," Shuri said. "I've run 6 separate stress models against what little data we pulled from this morning's scout craft, and I believe asterisk not know that it will hold against standard Imperial weaponry as well. What I don't know is whether they're carrying something specifically designed to break shields like ours. A civilization that casually crosses galaxies has likely encountered energy barriers before. So we don't know if we're about to win a siege," Sam said, "or just delay one." "Astute, Birdman, deeply comforting but astute." Moved to the dais, addressing the room, Wakandan generals, a scattering of Dora Milaje commanders, and now 4 Avengers standing shoulder to shoulder with a nation that had, 11 years earlier, been a myth to the rest of the world. "We will not simply wait behind our shield and hope it holds. Okoye, mobilize the border forces. M'Baku, your people take the eastern approach. If they attempt a ground assault to bypass our aerial defenses, I want the mountain tribe's knowledge of that terrain working against them. Shuri, I want every offensive system we possess ready within the hour." "Already ahead of you," Shuri said, and the holographic display shifted, revealing weapon platforms integrated into Wakanda's outer defenses that even Tony Stark, watching remotely via a secure feed from New York, let out a low whistle at. "Okay," Tony's voice crackled through the command center speakers. "I take back every joke I've ever made about vibranium being a one-trick material. Shuri, that's a asterisk kinetic barrier disruptor array, isn't it? You built a system that can selectively phase incoming projectiles out of." "I don't have time to explain my genius to you right now, Stark. We have an invasion in 14 minutes. Rain check on the Geek Out session." The Imperial approach was, in its own cold way, a thing of terrible precision. 12 vessels descending in formation, walkers deployed in advance guard positions the moment they crossed the tree line, troop transports holding back in a second wave that suggested whoever commanded this operation had learned something from the chaos of New York's opening hours and had no intention of repeating it. At the head of the formation, aboard the lead transport, a figure watched Wakanda's shield shimmer into view on approach with an expression that, beneath a mask that hid every feature but a pair of pale, calculating eyes, betrayed nothing but clinical interest. Commander Veth Ren had not personally led an incursion in 11 years. His rank generally excused him from anything so pedestrian as ground assault, but the readings coming off this particular world had crossed his desk with an urgency that made delegation feel unwise. Energy manipulation entities, advanced metallurgy that predated conventional industrialization by centuries, if the survey drones were to be believed. And now, a shield technology sophisticated enough to register on his ship's sensors as a genuine tactical obstacle, rather than the primitive defense he'd expected from a species barely a decade into extraplanetary contact. "Report," he said, voice flat, uninterested in anything but data. "Shield integrity remains at full strength, Commander. No degradation from our approach scans. Then we test it properly." Veth Ren's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Bring the walkers forward. I want to see what breaks first, their defense or their nerve." The first exchange, when it came, was almost anticlimactic in its violence, a testing volley Imperial Walker cannons unleashing concentrated fire against Wakanda's shield at a single coordinate, probing for weakness with the patient cruelty of an enemy that had all the time in the world and none of the desperation. The shield held, barely. Shuri's readouts spiked into territory that made her generals visibly tense, energy reserves dropping in a curve that, extrapolated forward, gave the barrier perhaps 6 hours of sustained assault before catastrophic failure. "Their testing capacity," she said, voice tight, hands flying across her interface. "This isn't an attack yet, this is reconnaissance by force. They want to know exactly how much pressure it takes to break us before they commit to breaking us." "Then we don't give them clean data," T'Challa said. "Akoi coordinate with the Avengers. If they're testing our defense, we test theirs back. Draw their fire, force them to reveal their offensive capacity before they've finished mapping ours." It was Natasha who moved first, and it was, in retrospect, exactly the kind of decision that had made her one of the most dangerous people on the planet long before she'd ever fought alongside a god or a super soldier. She went in not to win, but to gather information, treating a live battlefield the way she'd once treated a hostile intelligence briefing, as a puzzle to be read, not a fight to be brute forced. She and a contingent of Dora Milaje slipped through a service gate on the shield's eastern flank, moving low and fast through Wakandan brushland that Akoi's forces knew better than any invader ever could, and struck the flank of the advancing Walker column with a precision assault that dropped 2 Imperial scouts before the enemy even registered the breach. "Contact, eastern flank," Natasha reported, already moving, already retreating before the walkers could reorient their heavier weapons toward her position. "Confirmed, they're carrying something beyond standard infantry blasters. I just watched a scout unit vaporize a tree with a single shot from a shoulder-mounted weapon. That's new, that's not what we saw in New York." "That," Shuri said, already cross-referencing the report against her sensor data. "Adjusting shield harmonics to account for higher-yield weaponry. Brother, I don't love what I'm seeing. If they're escalating their loadout specifically for us, that means someone up there did their homework on Wakandan defenses before this assault even launched." T'Challa's jaw tightened. "Meaning they came prepared to break us specifically." "Meaning," Shuri said, "I don't think this was ever really about testing curiosity. I think this was the plan from the moment their scouts clocked our vibranium reserves this morning." The battle that followed was unlike anything either side of the conflict, Wakandan or Imperial, had fully rehearsed for, precisely because neither had faced the other's particular combination of capabilities before. Imperial walkers, built to crush conventional resistance, found themselves harried by Dora Milaje warriors moving with a speed and coordination that outpaced their targeting system's predictive algorithms. Imperial troopers, drilled to expect either panic or organized military resistance, encountered something stranger. A defense that blended ancient martial discipline with technology 2 generations ahead of anything their intelligence briefings had prepared them for. And above it all, the Avengers fought not as the primary force, but as something closer to a mobile reserve, plugging gaps, breaking up concentrations of enemy fire, buying Wakandan forces the room to fight the war on their own terms rather than the Empire's. Sam Wilson, airborne again despite protests from every medical professional within 100 miles, found himself running escort for a squadron of Wakandan aerial units, sleek, silent craft that moved with a grace no Earth aircraft could match, and felt something loosen in his chest that had nothing to do with the fighting and everything to do with not being alone in it anymore. "These pilots are good asterisk," he reported, banking hard to cover a Wakandan fighter's blind spot as three TIE analogs screamed past. "Like genuinely good, not good for humans good. They've had longer to prepare for this exact kind of fight than we have." T'Challa's voice came back, distant but steady, coordinating from a forward command position near the shield's edge. 5,000 years of preparing for the day the outside world came for what we have. We simply didn't expect it to arrive from the stars." Bruce, meanwhile, remained on the shield's inner perimeter, monitoring the barrier's integrity alongside Shuri with the particular focus of a scientist who understood exactly how close to catastrophic failure they were sailing. "Shuri, your harmonics adjustment bought us maybe 40 more minutes at this rate," he said, watching the readout climb toward a threshold neither of them wanted to name aloud. "But if they keep escalating their weapons output the way they have been, we're going to hit a wall before this fight resolves either way." "Aware, Dr. Banner." Shuri's voice had lost some of its earlier confidence, replaced by the taut focus of someone doing triage on a problem with no good answers left. "I'm working on a solution. I simply don't currently have one." It was in that gap, between Shuri's admission and whatever solution might have eventually followed it, that the battle's actual turning point arrived. And it arrived from a direction nobody in the command center had been watching closely enough. Commander Veth Ren, observing the engagement's progress from his transport with mounting and uncharacteristic irritation, made the decision that would define the rest of the night. He committed his reserve force, a full second wave of troopers and 2 additional walkers, directly against the shield's weakest measured point, calculating correctly as it turned out that concentrated force at a single coordinate would achieve what distributed pressure across the whole barrier had not. "Concentrate all fire, eastern quadrant," he ordered. "I want that shield broken within the hour." The result was immediate and alarming. Shuri's readouts, already strained, spiked into red across every metric that mattered. The localized shield integrity at the targeted coordinate collapsing toward failure in a curve that gave her, by her own rapid calculation, perhaps 11 minutes before a full breach. "Brother, I need everyone off that eastern flank asterisk now. If this segment fails, I don't know what happens to the rest of the barrier, and I am not eager to find out in real time." Steve, who had spent the engagement coordinating ground movements from a forward position near the threatened quadrant, made the call without hesitation. "Everyone fall back from the eastern breach point. Natasha, Akoy, get your people clear." They did mostly. It was in the chaos of that withdrawal, Wakandan and Avenger forces disengaging under increasingly heavy fire, that Sam Wilson spotted something the tactical displays hadn't flagged. A squad of Wakandan border scouts, cut off by the Walker advance, pinned against a rock formation with no clean route back to the main line. "Cap, I've got 6 Wakandans trapped near the eastern ridge. They're not gonna make it out on foot before that shield segment fails." Steve didn't hesitate. "Go." "I'll cover from the ground." What followed was, in the after-action reports filed on both sides of the conflict, described in very different terms. To the Wakandan generals, it became known simply as the Ridge Rescue. The moment Captain America, shield raised against weapons fire that would have killed an unarmored soldier a dozen times over, physically interposed himself between a pinned squad and an advancing walker long enough for Sam to extract them one by one, wings straining under the weight of passengers they were never quite designed to carry. To Commander Veth Ren, watching from his transport with his earlier irritation curdling into something colder and more focused, it registered as data. Confirmation that these Earth defenders would risk catastrophic exposure to save a handful of soldiers who, by imperial military doctrine, would have been written off as an acceptable loss the moment they were cut off, he murmured, watching the extraction complete with a kind of detached fascination. "They value individual survival over tactical efficiency. Inefficient, and yet," he paused, recalculating something behind those pale, calculating eyes, "it does explain their earlier resistance in New York. A species willing to expend disproportionate resources protecting the few is a species that fights harder than the math would predict." He did not order a ceasefire. But he did, for the first time since the assault began, order his forces to hold position rather than press the advantage of the weakening shield segment. a decision his subordinates would later characterize in reports that never fully satisfied their superiors as *reassessment*. Though none of them could articulate exactly what had prompted it. The pause was brief, but it was enough, shield integrity stabilizing. Shuri's voice cracked with relief as the readouts mercifully began climbing back from the brink. Whatever they're doing, they've eased off the eastern quadrant. I don't know why, but I am not going to question it. I'm rerouting every reserve we have into that segment while we've got the window. By the time the Imperial contingent withdrew, pulling back at 2350, not defeated but clearly recalculating, the same unsettling patience the scouts had shown that morning now applied to a full military engagement. Wakanda's defenders were exhausted, bloodied, and for the moment, victorious in the only sense that mattered. Still standing, still sovereign, still holding the line between an empire and everything it wanted to take, T'Challa found Steve near the ridge where the rescue had happened, both men bearing the particular stillness of soldiers processing a fight that had cost more than either wanted to fully catalog yet. You could have died holding that position, T'Challa said. It wasn't quite an accusation. So could your border scouts if I hadn't. Steve managed a tired, genuine half-smile. Seemed like the better trade. Studied him for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, not quite surprise, but a kind of confirmation, the settling of a question he'd perhaps been quietly asking since the Avengers jet first touched down. You fight for your people the way we fight for ours. I confess, Captain, I did not fully appreciate that until tonight. We're not that different, your people and mine, Steve said. Wakanda hid because the world wasn't ready to see what you'd built. We fought because somebody's got to, I guess. Same instinct, different circumstances. Perhaps. T'Challa turned, looking out over the battlefield where Wakandan medics and Avengers alike moved among the wounded with the shared, wordless coordination of allies rather than strangers. Whatever the reason, I believe Wakanda's era of isolation, whatever remained of it, ended tonight. Not by choice, but ended nonetheless. Shuri's voice crackled through both their comms, equal parts exhausted and grimly triumphant. Shields holding, casualties are survivable, and I have approximately 400 terabytes of Imperial weapons telemetry to analyze before I sleep, which, brother, I would like it noted, I am extremely excited about despite everything else that happened tonight. Steve managed a real laugh, the first one in what felt like days. I'll let Stark know he's got competition. Oh, he already knows. I made sure of that around hour 2 of this engagement. Above them, the last of the Imperial transports faded from Wakanda's airspace, retreating back toward the fleet still hanging over a wounded, defiant New York, carrying with it a report that would land on a desk far above Commander Veth Wren's pay grade, a report nodding, in the dry clinical language of Imperial military assessment, that the world designated for annexation had proven considerably more costly to subdue than initial survey data had suggested. In a command chamber aboard the Ashen Providence that report crossed the desk of an officer whose interest in Earth had, over the course of one very long day, evolved from strategic curiosity into something closer to genuine concern. Concern that would, within hours, prompt a communication far above his own authority, directly to the one figure in the entire Imperial hierarchy, whose personal attention this world had just unknowingly earned. The communication reached Coruscant 9 hours later, filtered through 6 layers of Imperial bureaucracy that would ordinarily have buried a mid-sector commander's field report under a mountain of routine paperwork for weeks. It did not stay buried. Someone in naval intelligence, reading Commander Veth Wren's account of energy manipulation entities, shield technology exceeding projected planetary tech levels, and soldiers who died protecting the tactically insignificant rather than retreating to preserve the tactically significant, flagged it for priority review within the hour. By the time it reached the Emperor's inner circle, it had acquired a designation that guaranteed it would not sit in a queue. *anomalous resistance, sector designation unknown, review requested. Sheev Palpatine read the report twice. He did not often bother with a second reading of field intelligence from a newly contacted world. Most such reports described the same predictable arc of primitive resistance crumbling before Imperial doctrine, a story he had watched play out across 1,000 worlds and found by now thoroughly uninteresting. This one was different. Not because the resistance had succeeded. Veth Wren's forces had, after all, withdrawn by choice rather than defeat, but because of a single detail buried in the sensor logs. an energy manipulation entity that had absorbed blaster fire rather than simply resisting it, in a manner that bore no resemblance to any shielding technology in the Imperial catalog. He set the datapad down slowly and in the quiet of his private chamber allowed himself to consider a possibility he had not seriously entertained in decades, asterisk the Force expressed differently. Or something adjacent to it, asterisk send for Lord Vader, he said to the room to no one, and somewhere in the bowels of the Death Star's construction yard, orbiting a moon that would one day become considerably more famous. A comm officer relayed the summons within the minute. Darth Vader arrived in the Emperor's private chamber with the particular soundless menace that had over 2 decades become as much a part of his identity as the mask itself. The mechanical rasp of his respirator the only sound accompanying his approach, black cape settling around him as he came to halt before the throne. Master Vader. Palpatine did not rise, did not turn from the viewport overlooking the construction yard below, though his voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man about to hand someone a puzzle he expected them to enjoy solving. I have a matter requiring your specific attention. A newly contacted world designation still pending, though its inhabitants apparently call it Earth, has proven unexpectedly resistant to Commander Veth Ren's incursion force. Single world resisting a probing action is hardly cause for my personal attention, Vader said, though something in his posture had already shifted, some old and familiar attentiveness surfacing at whatever was coming next. Ordinarily, no. Palpatine finally turned, dark eyes glinting with something that might, on a less monstrous face, have passed for genuine curiosity. But the sensor logs describe an entity capable of absorbing and redirecting energy weapon discharge through means that do not match any known shielding technology. I want you to consider, Lord Vader, what else might produce such an effect. Vader was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost none of its mechanical flatness, but something underneath it had sharpened. You believe this world harbors force sensitivity. I believe, Palpatine said, that I have not encountered a genuine mystery in some years, and I find myself curious whether you share the sentiment. Take a strike force. Assess this world's resistance personally. If there is genuine power there, untrained, unshaped, as such things so often are on worlds beyond the Republic's old reach, I want it identified. And I want its bearers given the opportunity to understand what they are under proper guidance. Unspoken alternative, what happened to force sensitives who declined such guidance, hung in the air between them, familiar to both. It will be done, Vader said, and turned to go, already calculating fleet requisitions, strike team compositions, the particular satisfaction of a mission that offered, for once, something more interesting than mere conquest. 12 hours later, a second Imperial contingent broke formation from the main fleet still hanging over New York and began a slow, deliberate descent toward Manhattan, smaller than the initial invasion force, but composed. Tony's sensors immediately flagged. Of markedly more sophisticated vessels. Friday, what am I looking at? Boss, I'm reading a command shuttle configuration escorted by 6 fighter craft and a single vessel of a design we haven't seen yet, smaller than the transports, faster, heavily armored. Whatever's aboard that ship, the Empire built it specifically to protect. Great, Tony muttered, watching the formation break atmosphere over the city. VIP treatment, love that for us. Convoy did not fan out to establish new landing zones. It descended in a straight, unhurried line directly toward the ruins of Central Park, where the initial invasion force had first made landfall 2 days earlier, and settled with a precision that suggested whoever was aboard had no interest in subtlety and even less interest in delay. The ramp lowered, and Darth Vader walked out into a city that had, until that moment, been fighting an enemy without a face. He did not look to the assembled Avengers who arrived within minutes, Steve at the front, shield raised, Wanda hovering a dozen feet up with crimson energy already curling around her hands, Sam banking overhead like anything they had expected. Not another faceless trooper. A figure nearly 7 feet tall, sheathed head to toe in matte black armor and a cape that moved with a weight all its own, his breath a mechanical rasp that carried across the ruined park with a menace no words could have improved on. I am looking, Vader said, voice modulated and flat and somehow more unsettling for its calm, for whoever among you manipulates energy without instrument or technology. Step forward and this need not become a battlefield. Wanda's hands tightened, crimson light flaring brighter. That's a strange way to introduce yourself. Is an honest one. Vader's masked head tilted very slightly toward her, an assessment cold and immediate, the way a jeweler might appraise a stone before deciding whether it was worth the trouble of cutting. You, the power moves through you without discipline, untrained but genuine. "You've got about 5 seconds to explain what you're doing in my city before I stop being polite about it," Steve said, shield raised. Positioning himself between Vader and the rest of the team with the reflexive protectiveness of a man who'd spent his whole life standing in front of things worth protecting. "Polite was never the offer," Vader said and raised one gloved hand. What happened next would be described in the after-action reports filed by every Avenger present in language that struggled to capture its actual horror. Steve's shield, vibranium, indestructible, the single most reliable object in his entire life, simply stopped asterisk, wrenched from his grip by a force that touched nothing and moved everything, hovering in the air between them for one suspended, impossible moment before Vader closed his fist and sent it hurtling backward into a shattered oak with enough force to bury it 8 inches into the trunk. Steve stared at his empty hands, and for the first time since the fleet's arrival felt something colder than fear settle into his chest. The particular vertigo of a man who had just watched the laws of physics he'd built his entire fighting philosophy around simply refused to apply. "That's not possible," he said quietly to no one. "It is considerably possible," Vader said, "for those attuned to the Force. Which captain you are not, she is." The masked head turned back to Wanda, who had gone very still, crimson energy still crackling around her fingers, but her expression, for the first time in 2 days of fighting an entire empire, uncertain. "The power you wield is crude, unfocused, but it responds to will in a manner not unlike the Force itself. I would know how you came by it." "Don't answer to you," Wanda said and struck. It was, by any measure, one of the most devastating attacks she had ever unleashed. A wave of crimson energy that had leveled buildings, that had once briefly held the mind of an android god in check, thrown with the full force of 2 days of accumulated fear and fury, and the particular desperation of someone who had just watched an ally's shield ripped away like it was nothing. Vader raised a single hand, and the wave stopped, not absorbed, not deflected, but held, frozen in place a foot from his outstretched palm, crimson light straining against something invisible and immovable. And for one long, terrible moment the entire park held its breath as an unstoppable force met something that had, apparently, never learned it was supposed to be movable. Then with a small, almost contemptuous gesture, Vader redirected the entire wave sideways, sending it crashing harmlessly into an already ruined section of the park, and took one slow, deliberate step forward. "Crude," he said again, "but genuine. You could be considerable with proper instruction." "I don't want your instruction." Wanda's voice shook, more from shock than fear, though there was plenty of both. "I want you off my planet. That," Vader said, "is not currently an option available to you." What followed was, by any account filed afterward, the single most dangerous engagement the Avengers had faced since the fleet's arrival, not because Vader brought overwhelming numbers, but because he brought something none of Earth's defenders had a framework for fighting. Sam Wilson dove in from above, wings folded for maximum speed, weapons trained on a target that had just demonstrated an ability to catch a super soldier's shield out of the air, and found his own trajectory simply arrested 40 feet from impact, his entire flight path redirected with a casual flick of Vader's wrist that sent him tumbling into a stand of trees hard enough to crack his ribs. "Sam." Steve's shout carried real fear, the particular fear of a leader watching his people get hurt by something he didn't understand how to counter. Natasha, who had spent 2 days cataloging every weakness Imperial forces displayed, found herself with nothing useful to draw on. Vader wasn't a trooper, wasn't a walker, wasn't anything her extensive tactical library had prepared her for. She did the only thing that made sense. She got Sam clear, hauling him upright despite his protests, and fell back to a defensible position rather than throw good tactics after bad ones. It was Bruce, watching from a safe distance, green already threading beneath his skin, the particular calculation of a man deciding whether the moment had finally arrived to stop holding back, who made the call nobody wanted to make. "Steve, I think this is the last resort we've been saving." Steve, shieldless, watching Wanda struggle against an opponent who treated her considerable power like a minor inconvenience, made the decision in half a second. "Do it." Hulk that emerged was not the chaotic engine of destruction from a decade earlier. Years of partnership with Bruce, years of hard-won control, had shaped something more deliberate, still devastating, still a force of nature, but a force of nature that knew, on some level, exactly what it was charging toward. The collision between Hulk and Vader shook the remaining trees in Central Park to their roots. Hulk's fist, capable of leveling buildings, capable of matching gods blow for blow, connected with an invisible wall a foot from Vader's chest and simply stopped. The impact's force redirected outward in a shockwave that flattened everything in a 30-foot radius except the two combatants at its center. Vader staggered, the first genuine reaction he'd shown all engagement, boots skidding backward through torn earth, and for one brief electric moment, the Avengers watching from the perimeter allowed themselves to hope that this, finally, was a fight they could win through simple, overwhelming force. Then Vader raised his hand again, and Hulk's next swing simply never landed, arrested mid-motion by the same invisible grip that had stopped Steve's shield. And with a gesture that cost him visibly more effort than anything he'd done so far, his breathing, audible even through the vocoder, growing sharper, more labored, he hurled 8 feet of pure muscle and rage backward across the park with enough force to uproot a line of trees. "Impressive," Vader said, and this time there was no contempt in it, only genuine, cold assessment. "Rage given form and strength beyond reasonable limits," another expression worth understanding in time. Hulk was already back on his feet, already charging again, and Vader, breathing harder now, the physical toll of the engagement clearly mounting despite his controlled composure, met the charge with his lightsaber igniting for the first time, a blade of pure crimson energy that hissed to life with a sound like the world tearing. The blade did not cut through Hulk's hide the way it cut through Durasteel, but it did something worse. It burned, a wound that cauterized as fast as it opened, drawing a roar of genuine pain from a creature who rarely, if ever, felt pain that registered. "Enough!" Steve's voice cracked across the battlefield and against every tactical instinct he possessed. He ran directly into the fight, unarmed, shieldless, driven by nothing but the desperate need to stop his team from being systematically dismantled by a single opponent. "Vodka, you want to talk? Talk to Ma." Vodka's masked head turned, lightsaber still humming, Hulk staggering back, nursing a wound already beginning to close. "You have no power worth my attention, Captain." "Not, but I've got something you clearly don't, a reason to protect people who can't protect themselves." "You want to test my planet's resistance. Test it against that." For a long moment, Vodka said nothing, lightsaber held steady, the entire ruined park holding its breath around them. Then slowly, deliberately, he deactivated the blade, the crimson glow winking out, and something in his posture shifted, not retreat, not surrender, but a kind of recalculation Steve couldn't fully parse. "You are correct that this world's resistance is not without merit," Vodka said finally. "The Emperor will find that noteworthy." He turned, cape sweeping, already walking back toward his shuttle with the unhurried certainty of a man who had gotten precisely what he came for. "This engagement is concluded, for now." "That's it," Wanda called after him, chest heaving, crimson energy still crackling weakly around trembling hands. "You just lova?" Vodka paused at the ramp, and though his mask revealed nothing, something in his stillness suggested he was considering her more carefully than his earlier dismissiveness implied. "I came to assess whether this world's power was genuine. It is. What happens next is no longer my decision alone to make." The ramp began to close behind him. "Train the anger, girl, or it will train you." Shuttle lifted off, escort fighters falling into formation, and within minutes the entire strike force had rejoined the main fleet, leaving behind a ruined park, a shieldless Captain America, a badly injured Sam Wilson, a Hulk nursing a wound that would take hours to fully heal, and a Scarlet Witch standing very still amid the wreckage, staring at her own hands as though seeing them for the first time back at the compound, as evening settled and the med bay filled once more. The mood was darker than it had been even in the invasion's opening hours, not from casualties, though there were plenty of those to tend to, but from the particular specific dread of an enemy who had just demonstrated without breaking a sweat that Earth's most powerful defenders were not, in fact, its strongest asset. "Stop my shield out of the air," Steve said, sitting on the edge of a cot, staring at the recovered shield now resting dented across his knees. "Didn't touch it, didn't need to." "Stopped a Hulk strength punch cold," Brussa added, voice quiet. Brussa again, exhausted in the particular way that only followed a transformation. "I've seen a lot of things stop a punch like that. None of them were a single guy standing in a park." Wanda hadn't spoken since they'd returned. She sat apart from the others, knees drawn up, and it was Vision, newly arrived from a mission overseas, having heard the reports en route and arrived just in time to catch the aftermath, who settled beside her without a word, offering nothing but presents. "A call at the Force," she said finally, quietly. "Said what I do is crude, but related, like it's a smaller version of something he understands completely and I don't understand at all." "That frighten you?" Vision asked gently. "Yes." She looked down at her hands, still faintly warm with residual energy. Because if he's right, there's a whole philosopha asterisk to this power that I've been improvising my way through for years. And whatever he knows about it, he chose violence first. What does that make the thing I'm carrying inside Ma? Vajan considered this with his usual careful precision. It makes it a tool, Wanda, as it has always been. Tools do not choose their nature, only their bearers do. Across the room, Tony had gone very quiet, reviewing footage of the engagement frame by frame, watching a lightsaber ignite in real time and trying, with visibly limited success, to reconcile what he'd just seen with any framework of physics he'd previously considered comprehensive. Frudda, he said finally, pull every scrap of energy data we got off that thing's weapon, and cross-reference the telekinetic displacement readings against anything strange people might have on record. Because I think I istarusk thunk what just walked through Central Park wasn't a soldier. It was a warning shot from somebody who wanted us to know exactly how outmatched we actually are. Nobody in the room disagreed. Far above, aboard the flagship, Darth Vader stood in a private meditation chamber, one hand resting against the cool transparastal of a viewport overlooking a wounded city, and considered with the particular careful attention he reserved for genuinely rare things, a world that had in the span of 2 days, produced not one but 2 distinct expressions of a power he had spent decades believing existed only within the narrow lineage of Jedi and Sith. He opened a secure channel to Coruscant. Musta, he said when Pulpatun's hologram flickered to life before him. The reports were accurate. There is force sensitivity on this world, untrained, unshaped, expressed through means I do not yet fully understand. And Master, he paused, weighing how much to reveal, old habits of careful information control asserting themselves even now. I believe it may not be limited to a single individual. There are others, stranger ones. Beings whose power does not originate from the Force at all, and yet accomplishes similar ends. Pulpatun's hologram was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a note Vudka had not heard in years, something that might in a lesser man have been called delight. Then, Lord Vudka, I believe we have found a world worth far more careful attention than a simple annexation. A pause, calculating, patient. Tell me everything. Palpatine's summons reached Wakanda by way of an unlikely messenger. Not a warship, not a strike team, but a single unmarked shuttle that dropped out of the fleet's holding pattern over New York and requested, not demanded. A distinction that unsettled Tony Stark more than any show of force would have safe passage to deliver a diplomatic communication. They want to talk, Rhodey said, watching the shuttle's transponder ping request scroll across the compound's comms display. After Central Park, after Vader tore through our best shot like it was a light workout, diplomacy after a demonstration of overwhelming force is Empire 101, Natasha said, arms crossed, already running the scenario forward in her head with the particular grimness of someone who'd read this playbook before, just never on a planetary scale. Show them what you can do, then offer them a deal that looks generous by comparison. It's not diplomacy. It's negotiation with a gun already on the table. Then we don't negotiate alone, Steve said. Get Wakanda on the line, get Strange if he'll pick up. If they're bringing terms, I want every ally we've got in the room when we hear them. The communication, when it finally arrived, patched simultaneously into the Avengers compound, Wakanda's palace, and a hastily arranged secure link to the New York sanctum, where Stephen Strange had spent the last 2 days doing something none of them had been briefed on and clearly did not intend to explain yet, was not from Vader, and not from Commander Veth Ren. It was from the Emperor himself. His hologram resolved in miniature above a dozen different displays across 3 separate command centers simultaneously. A hooded figure whose face, half-shrouded, radiated a stillness that felt less like calm and more like something coiled, patient, and utterly certain of its own inevitability. Champions of Earth, Palpatine said, and his voice, even filtered through a hologram's flat reproduction, carried an unsettling warmth. The particular cadence of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of sounding reasonable while asking for everything. You have fought with considerable valor these past days. I commend it, truly. It is rare in my experience to find a world so young in the wider galaxy already so willing to bleed for its own sovereignty. To the terms, Steve said, flat, unwilling to be charmed by a man who'd sent Vader through Central Park as an opening move. Direct, I appreciate that as well. Something that might have been amusement flickered across the hologram's shrouded features. The terms are simple, Captain Rogers. Earth's continued autonomy, its governance, its cultures, its people largely unmolested in exchange for 2 things. First, formal acknowledgement of imperial jurisdiction and the establishment of a garrison presence. standard practice for any world entering the Empire's protection. Second, the pause here was deliberate, theatrical, a showman's beat. The individuals among you exhibiting force sensitivity or capabilities analogous to it will accompany Lord Vader for proper instruction. Willingly, I would prefer, though willingness is, in my experience, ultimately a formality. Wanda's sharp inhale was audible even over the comlink. You want to take our people, T'Challa said, voice cold from the Wakanda feed, in exchange for letting us keep the rest of what's ours. I want to cultivate extraordinary potential rather than see it squandered through lack of guidance, Palpatine corrected mildly. But I understand how the offer might read otherwise from where you stand. Consider it, all of you. The alternative, continued resistance against a military apparatus that spans a galaxy your world has only just discovered exists, is not, I think, a path that ends well for anyone you're sworn to protect. Hologram flickered, and for the first time a second figure resolved beside the first, not Vader but someone else, a woman in Imperial Command uniform whose bearing suggested significant rank, studying the assembled resistance leaders with cold, professional interest. You have 3 days, Palpatine said, to consider the offer. Use them wisely. I would prefer this arrangement concluded through cooperation rather than the alternative, though I confess, Captain, some part of me would find the alternative genuinely interesting to observe. Transmission cut, and for a long moment, no one on any of the 3 link comm channels said anything at all. Stephen Strange broke the silence, and when he did, his voice carried a weight that made everyone else's exhaustion feel suddenly, uncomfortably small by comparison. I need to tell you all something, he said, and I need you to actually listen because I've spent the last 2 days doing something considerably more dangerous than fighting stormtroopers. What did you do, Strange? Tony asked, already bracing. I went looking for the Force. A pause, the particular pause of a man choosing his next words with real care, not metaphorically. I opened a working specifically designed to sense the nature of Vader's power when he first arrived in New York, and I followed the thread of it as far as I safely could. And I need you to understand magic, as I practice it, as the Ancient One taught it, as it's existed on Earth for millennia, draws from identifiable sources. Dimensional energy, the mystic arts as codified across 1,000 years of study. It has a asterisk shape, I understand. The Force doesn't? Natasha asked. Force isn't a source I'm drawing from at all. It's Strange exhaled, and even through the comm link the sound carried real unease and emotion Stephen Strange rarely allowed himself to broadcast. It's everywhere, it's in everything. It doesn't answer to ritual or willpower the way our magic does. It's less a power you wield and more a medium you exist within, whether you're aware of it or not. Every living thing in that galaxy is, apparently, swimming in an ocean most of them never learn to see. Wanda's power, whatever its actual origin, resonates with that ocean in a way our traditional sorcery simply doesn't. What does that mean for us? Steve asked. It means, Strange said, that Vader wasn't lying when he called her power crude but genuine. And it means the Emperor's offer isn't really a threat to conquer Earth. It's an offer to harvest something he thinks Earth is uniquely positioned to produce. Force-sensitive individuals born outside the galaxy's usual channels for identifying and training them. That's not standard Imperial doctrine. Veth Ren's initial invasion was standard doctrine. This, he gestured though no one could see it, this is something Palpatine wants for himself personally, and I don't think that's a coincidence. The 3 days that followed were, in their own way, more grueling than the fighting itself, a slow, grinding negotiation not with the Empire, but among Earth's own defenders, over what exactly they owed each other and how far any of them was willing to go to protect it. Wanda, for her part, spent much of it in isolation, wrestling with a question none of the others could fully answer for her, whether accepting Vader's offer of training, however monstrous the source, might be the only way to ever truly understand a power she'd spent years using without comprehension. I keep thinking about what he said, she told Vision, the 2 of them sitting in the wreckage of what had once been a garden behind the compound, now cratered from stray fire during the invasion's opening hours. That the anger trains me or I train it, and I don't, Vision, I don't actually know which one's been happening all this time. You have caused harm with your power, Vision said gently, and you have also saved countless lives with it. Both are true. I do not believe either fact requires you to accept instruction from a man who conquers galaxies for a living, but it doesn't mean I shouldn't learn something from someone. She looked up at him, uncertain in a way that felt, to Vision, both painfully human and entirely unlike the composed, controlled Wanda he'd known for years. I just don't know where else I'd find a teacher for this. Strange knows magic. He doesn't know whatever this is. It was Peter Parker, of all people. 18 years old, radiating none of the tactical or magical expertise everyone else in the compound seemed to possess, who offered the observation that ultimately mattered most. "For what it's worth," he said, catching Wanda in the hallway on his way to check on Miguel Reyes for the third time in 2 days, an excuse he wasn't fully willing to admit to himself yet. "The guy who offered you lessons also ripped Cap's shield out of his hands for fun and set the Hulk on fire with a laser sword. I don't think the scary guy who conquers planets is usually the best career counselor." Wanda actually laughed, small and surprised, the first genuine laugh anyone had gotten out of her in days. "That's actually a pretty good point, kid. I have my moments." Peter shrugged, already moving on, already halfway to the door. "For what it's worth, I think you'll figure it out without him. You've been doing that the whole time anyway." While Wanda wrestled with an offer she would ultimately, unanimously, and with real conviction refuse, Tony Stark pursued a different angle entirely. One born from his conversation with Strange and a nagging engineer's suspicion that the Empire's confidence rested on an assumption it hadn't fully tested. "They think they're dealing with a backwater," he said, gathering the War Council for what would become the final strategy session before the Empire's 3-day deadline expired. "Every offer, every threat, every tactical decision Veth, Ren and Vader have made so far assumes Earth's ceiling is roughly what they've already seen. Wanda's power, our tech, Wakanda's shields, but that's not the ceiling, that's the asterisk floor asterisk." "Meaning?" Rhodey asked. "We haven't shown them Thor. We haven't shown them what happens when Strange stops scouting and starts fighting with the full sanctum behind him. We haven't shown them Wakanda's actual offensive capability, because Shuri spent 3 days building instead of deploying. We haven't shown them the Guardians, who according to Rocket's last transmission are currently 3 days out and bringing, quote, some very large and extremely angry friends." Tony leaned forward, and for the first time since the fleet's arrival, something like genuine confidence had returned to his voice. "This isn't a negotiation, people, it's a bluff. And I think it's time we called it." Steve studied the room, Wakandan generals, Avengers battered but unbroken, Strange's projection flickering in from the sanctum, Shuri's latest weapons telemetry scrolling across every available display, and felt the particular, familiar clarity that came before every decision he'd ever fully committed to. "Then we don't wait for their deadline," he said. "We send our own answer. We hit the fleet directly, full coordinated assault, everything we've got before they finish deciding we're worth the trouble of conquering properly. We stop reacting to their timeline and start setting our own. That's a war, Cap," Sam said quietly. "A real one, not skirmishes, not testing each other's defenses. A full offensive against a force that's already shown us what its command-level assets can do." "It's already a war, Sam," Steve said. "Has been since the first ship broke atmosphere. The only question left is whether we fight it on our terms or theirs." Nobody in the room disagreed. And somewhere above the ruined, defiant city, unbeknownst to any of them yet, 3 additional ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, smaller than the Imperial fleet, considerably stranger in configuration, and broadcasting an identification signal that Rocket Raccoon aboard the lead vessel had personally and somewhat proudly designed to be as obnoxious as possible to any Imperial sensor operator unfortunate enough to intercept it. Cap Fury's voice cut through the strategy session, carrying an edge that made everyone in the room go still. "You're gonna want to see this. We've got new arrivals inbound, and judging by the read on their weapons signature, I don't think they're here to negotiate either." Steve allowed himself, for the first time in 3 days, something close to a real smile. "Then let's give the Empire a proper welcome," he said, "all of us together." The Guardians of the Galaxy arrived over Earth at dawn, and Rocket Raccoon, monitoring 3 separate sensor feeds while simultaneously arguing with Drax about weapons allocation, took one look at the Imperial fleet's formation and let out a low, appreciative whistle. "Okay," he said, "that's a legitimately impressive military presence. I've robbed places with less firepower guarding them. Quill, wake up, we got a real fight this time." "I'm awake," Peter Quill said, though the crick in his neck suggested otherwise, squinting at the tactical display now crowding half the Milano's cockpit. "That's a Star Destroyer. That's an actual honest-to-God Star Destroyer like out of. If you say like out of a movie, I will space you myself," Gamora said, already running weapons diagnostics with the focused calm that made her, in Rocket's professional opinion, the only member of this crew worth trusting with the actual fighting part. "I was gonna say something cooler than that, you were not." Below them, Earth's assembled defense, Avengers, Wakandan forces, a sanctum's worth of sorcerers under Strange's coordination, and now 3 additional ships full of the galaxy's most improbable heroes, began the final preparations for an offensive that every strategist in the room had in one form or another described as the entire war, decided in a single engagement. Thor arrived 40 minutes later, and his entrance, unlike every careful, calculated arrival that had preceded it, came the way Thor's entrances generally did, with considerably more noise than strictly necessary and a genuinely furious edge that made Steve, watching him touch down on the compound's ruined lawn, understand immediately that London had not gone smoothly. "Leave for one battle," Thor said by way of greeting, Stormbreaker crackling with barely restrained lightning, "and I return to find an Empire has invaded my adopted home." Steven. "Where is this Vader? I have questions for him regarding shields and whether they are in fact indestructible." "Long story," Steve said. "Short version, yes, questions, plenty of them, but right now I need you focused on the fleet, not the guy who beat us in Central Park." "I heard about Central Park." Thor's expression sobered, something old and grim surfacing behind the usual bravado. "A being who stops Mjolnir's air mid-swing without moving is not something to dismiss lightly." "I have fought gods, Stephen. I have fought Thanos himself. I do not say this lightly. Whatever that man is, he is dangerous in a way that troubles me." "Then it's a good thing," Tony said, arriving with Rhodey and a tactical display already projecting the full assault plan, "that we're not planning to fight him directly today. We're going after the fleet. Take out enough of it that the Empire recalculates whether Earth's worth the cost, and we buy ourselves room to actually negotiate from strength instead of getting bullied by a hologram with a nice speaking voice." The assault plan, assembled over 3 sleepless days and finalized in the hours before dawn, divided Earth's combined forces into 4 coordinated strike elements, each targeting a different vulnerability. Bruce, Shuri, and Tony's combined analysis of captured Imperial technology had identified. Element 1, Thor, the Guardians, and a squadron of Wakandan fighters would strike the flagship's shield generators directly, a target Shuri had identified through painstaking analysis of the Ashen Providence *S energy signature during its brief communication window 3 days earlier. Element 2, Steve, Natasha, Sam, and a full contingent of Dora Milaje would lead a ground assault against the primary landing zones still holding Manhattan, clearing Imperial ground forces to relieve pressure on the city's civilian population before the orbital engagement's inevitable chaos rained debris across 5 boroughs. Element 3, Strange and a dozen sorcerers from sanctums across the globe, hastily assembled through portals that had been opening and closing across 6 continents for the better part of a day, would establish a mystical barrier around the most densely populated sections of the city, a defense against exactly the kind of orbital bombardment that had on other worlds apparently been the Empire's standard response to prolonged resistance. Element 4, Tony, Rhodey, Bruce, Wanda, and T'Challa, backed by the full might of Wakanda's newly calibrated defensive arsenal, would hold in reserve, ready to deploy wherever the battle's shifting fortunes demanded, and specifically prepared for the moment Commander Veth Ren or Darth Vader personally re-entered the fight. Questions? Steve asked, surveying a war room that had over 3 impossible days, assembled the largest coalition of extraordinary individuals Earth had ever fielded in a single engagement. Wanda raised her hand, and there was something different in her posture now, not the uncertain, shaken figure from Central Park's aftermath, but someone who had over 3 days of quiet reflection and one genuinely useful conversation with an 18-year-old in a hallway, arrived at a decision. "I want point on Element 4, she said. "If Vader comes back, I want to be the one who meets him, not because I think I can beat him, because I think I finally understand what he actually offered me and I want to give him my answer in person." Steve studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Element 4's yours to help lead, just don't do this alone. None of us do anything alone today." The battle began at 0600, when Thor's assault element breached the fleet's outer perimeter in a maneuver that Rocket would later describe, with genuine professional admiration, as recklessly, beautifully stupid, the Milano and 2 Guardian support vessels running interference for Thor, who flew directly through a formation of TIE fighters with Stormbreaker crackling, lightning arcing between enemy craft and chains that took out 3 fighters with a single overcharged strike. "I love this guy," Rocket said, watching the carnage unfold on his display. "Quill, remind me to steal his hammer axe thing before we leave." "You are not stealing Thor's weapon. I'm just saying it's a *, really * good weapon. A Aboard the Ashen Providence Commander Vethran watched the assault's opening minutes with the particular tension of a man whose careful, methodical campaign had just been replaced by something considerably more chaotic. Redirect the 2nd and 3rd squadrons to intercept. I want that lightning wielder's trajectory disrupted before he reaches shield generator range. Commander, the fleet's shield generators are. I am aware of what they are, and I am aware he appears to know it as well. Move. On the ground, Steve's element carved through Imperial resistance in Manhattan with a brutal, focused efficiency that owed as much to 3 days of hard-won knowledge about Imperial tactics as it did to raw heroics. Natasha's tactical library, painstakingly assembled from every previous engagement, had finally caught up to the enemy's playbook, and Dora Milaje warriors fighting alongside Avengers moved with the coordinated precision of forces who had, over one very long week, become genuine allies rather than merely convenient ones. Landing zone Bravo cleared, Okoye reported, her spear dripping with something that wasn't blood. Imperial troopers didn't bleed the way humans did, a detail that had unsettled more than one soldier on the ground before they'd learned not to think about it too hard. Copy that, Steve said, shield repaired, dents hammered out by Shuri's own hands the night before, in a gesture of alliance that had meant more to him than he'd fully articulated at the time, deflecting a volley of blaster fire as he pressed toward the next objective. Sam, how's the air situation? Getting better, Sam reported, banking hard as a TIE fighter's wreckage crashed into a building 3 blocks away, courtesy of a Wakandan fighter squadron that had, over the course of the invasion, become genuinely terrifyingly good at their jobs. Not gonna lie, Cap, having actual air support that isn't just me and Rhodey is a nice change of pace. Above them in the upper atmosphere, Strange's mystical barrier flickered into existence across 6 boroughs simultaneously, a shimmering dome visible from the ground as a faint golden shimmer against the morning sky. And for the first time in the entire conflict, ordinary New Yorkers looked up and saw something other than an invading force. They saw their own defenders, visibly, undeniably, holding the line. The battle's true turning point came 90 minutes in. When Thor's element finally breached the flagship's outer shielding and Shuri's targeting data, painstakingly assembled, cross-referenced against 3 days of captured telemetry, guided a coordinated strike directly against the Ashen Providence S primary shield generator array. The explosion that followed lit up the morning sky over New York like a second sunrise, and aboard the flagship, alarms blared through corridors as Commander Vethran, for the first time in the entire engagement, allowed something like genuine alarm to crack his professional composure. Shield integrity at 40% and falling. Commander, if that generator array fails completely, I am aware of the consequences of shield failure, Lieutenant. Vethran's voice remained flat, though his knuckles had gone white against the command console. Signal the reserve fleet. Tell them the assessment phase is concluded. We require immediate reinforcement, full engagement authorization. It was in that moment, flagship shields failing, reserve forces still hours from arrival, an alliance of Earth's extraordinary defenders pressing an advantage they'd fought 3 brutal days to earn, that Darth Vader made the decision that would define the battle's final act. He did not wait for reinforcement. He boarded a personal fighter and descended into the heart of the engagement alone, a black shape cutting through the chaos of the orbital battle with a singular purpose that had less to do with military strategy and more to do with a promise unspoken but understood, made to a girl in a ruined park 3 days earlier. Wanda felt him before she saw him. A disturbance in whatever strange sense had over the past week begun to sharpen inside her, a pressure against her awareness that resolved. Moments later, into the black-armored figure descending through Strange's mystical barrier with a casual disregard for its supposed impenetrability that made every sorcerer maintaining it wince in unison. He's here, she said, and Element 4, Tony, Rhodey, Bruce, T'Challa, fell into position around her without needing further explanation. Vader landed in the ruins of Central Park, precisely where their first encounter had unfolded, and for a long moment simply stood there, studying the assembled defenders with the particular stillness that had days earlier preceded a fight none of them had been ready for. Grown since our last meeting, he said, addressing Wanda directly, ignoring the others entirely. I can sense it. Whatever training you've undertaken these past days, it has sharpened something in you. I didn't train with a teacher, Wanda said, stepping forward, crimson energy building around her hands with a control that hadn't been there 3 days earlier, not more power but more precision, the difference between a wildfire and a forge. I trained with time, and with people who reminded me that I don't need someone who conquers planets to tell me what my power's worth. Pity, Vader said and ignited his lightsaber. I had hoped you would choose differently. What followed was not a repeat of Central Park's earlier lopsided engagement. Wanda did not attack with raw, undisciplined fury. She moved with the focused control of someone who had spent 3 days learning, through hard practice and harder self-reflection, exactly how much of her power was hers to command rather than simply unleash. Crimson energy wove around Vader's strikes rather than meeting them head-on, redirecting rather than resisting. And for the first time since his arrival on Earth, Darth Vader found himself genuinely, visibly working to maintain the upper hand. Better, he said, breathing harder now, lightsaber deflecting a lance of crimson energy that came close enough to singe his cape. Considerably better. I had good teachers, Wanda said. None of them wore a cape. Tony's repulsors added a covering barrage that forced Vader to split his attention, and Bruce, Hulk again, but a more controlled Hulk, one who'd learned 3 days earlier exactly what worked and what didn't against this particular opponent, moved to flank rather than charge headlong, forcing Vader into a defensive posture that hadn't been necessary in their first encounter. It was not, in the end, a battle Earth's defenders won outright. Vader remained, even fighting 4 opponents simultaneously, a genuinely terrifying force, his mastery of the Force allowing him to anticipate and counter attacks with a fluidity none of them could fully match. But it was, crucially, a battle he did not win either, and somewhere in the sustained, grinding stalemate of that engagement, both sides arrived, independently, at the same unspoken conclusion. This fight would not resolve today. Not decisively, not without a cost neither side had yet calculated as worth paying above the atmosphere. The flagship shield generators finally failed completely, and Commander Veth Ren, watching his primary vessel's defenses collapse while his reserve fleet remained hours away, and his most valuable strategic asset was personally embroiled in an unresolved ground engagement, made the call that would end the war's opening chapter. Signal general withdrawal, he said. The words costing him something visible, a professional pride wounded by a defeat he had not anticipated and could not fully explain. All forces disengage. We regroup at the fleet's secondary rally point and await Imperial Center's further instruction. Aboard the Ashen Providence, the order rippled outward through Imperial comm channels, and across Manhattan, across the fleet still holding low orbit, Imperial forces began, with the same unnerving discipline they'd shown throughout the entire engagement, an orderly, unhurried withdrawal that felt less like a rout and more like a chess player conceding a single, costly opening while very clearly planning to continue the game. In Central Park, Vader received the recall order through his own private channel and disengaged from the fight with a final, considering look at Wanda, bruised, breathing hard, crimson energy still faintly wreathing her hands. This is not concluded, he said. You will hear from the Empire again. I'm counting on it, Wanda said. Next time I'll be ready for you. He was gone within the minute, boarding a recalled fighter and rejoining the general retreat. And above the wounded, battered, but unmistakably defiant city, the Imperial fleet began its slow withdrawal to open space, leaving behind wreckage, casualties, and a world that had, against every expectation an empire spanning a galaxy might have reasonably held, simply refused to kneel. The celebration that followed, when it finally came, was smaller and quieter than any of them expected. Not a parade, not a triumphant address, but a gathering of exhausted allies in the ruins of Central Park as the sun set over a city still smoking from 3 days of war, counting losses and carefully, cautiously, allowing themselves to feel something like relief. Steve found Peter sitting with Miguel raised near the wreckage of the park's fountain, the paramedic finally off duty after 72 consecutive hours of work that had, by any reasonable accounting, saved dozens of lives the history books would never fully credit him for. You did good work this week, Steve said, crouching beside them. Both of you. Just doing my job, Miguel said, too tired for false modesty, too honest for anything but the plain truth. Somebody's gotta patch people up while you all fight the sky. Somebody's gotta fight the sky while people like you patch them up, Steve said. Feels like a fair trade to me. Peter, sitting between them, said nothing, but something in his expression, quiet, satisfied, the particular contentment of a teenager who'd found amid an alien invasion a friendship that felt like it might actually last, suggested he understood better than most of the assembled heroes exactly what had been won this week. Not a war, not yet, but something worth protecting and someone worth protecting it alongside. Across the park, T'Challa and Steve's gaze met over the heads of exhausted allies, and something passed between them, not quite a nod, not quite a smile, but the particular understanding of two leaders who had watched their people bleed for each other and come out the other side, however battered, as something closer to family than allies. Wanda stood apart from the celebration, looking up at the darkening sky where the Imperial fleet, though retreating, remained visible as a scattering of running lights against the stars, a promise unspoken but unmistakable that this was a pause, not an ending. Tony found her there and for once didn't lead with a joke. "You did good today," he said. "Better than good, you gave that 7-foot murder machine an actual fight," said we'd hear from the Empire again. "Yeah, well." Tony followed her gaze upward toward the retreating fleet and the vast, incomprehensible galaxy beyond it that Earth had, in the span of one impossible week, discovered it was now unavoidably part of. "Next time we'll be ready. We've got a whole planet's worth of people who just proved they don't scare easy. I'll take those odds." Above them, the last of the Imperial fleet folded into hyperspace, vanishing from Earth's sky as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a wounded city, an uneasy peace, and a galaxy's worth of questions that Earth's defenders, battered, allied, and for the first time in a very long week, genuinely hopeful, would spend the coming months learning to answer. The week the Galactic Empire came to Earth would, in the months that followed, become the subject of 1,000 competing narratives, government inquiries that struggled to classify an enemy no existing legal framework had anticipated, news specials that ran footage of Vader's lightsaber igniting over Central Park on an endless, disbelieving loop, and a public reckoning with the plain, undeniable fact that humanity's place in the universe had just gotten permanently, irreversibly smaller. And yet, for everyone who had actually stood on that battlefield, the story that mattered most was never really about the scale of what had arrived. It was about what Earth had chosen to become in response to it. Steve Rogers had spent the invasion's opening hours believing, on some level, that this was a fight the Avengers would face alone, the way they always had, a small, determined team standing between the world and whatever came for it. What he'd learned instead over 3 brutal days was that the world itself had an answer to overwhelming force that no single team, however extraordinary, could ever fully embody. It had people who refused to run, paramedics who held their ground, nations that had spent centuries hiding their strength and chose, when it mattered most, to stand fully visible. A girl with untrained power who found, in the space of a single terrifying week, both the danger in what she carried and the discipline to wield it on her own terms. Wakanda's isolation, already fractured by one alien war, closed entirely in the aftermath of this one, not through defeat, but through T'Challa's own deliberate choice to formalize what Steve had called, in the middle of that first desperate night, a shared mourning. Shuri's captured Imperial telemetry became the foundation of research programs that would, within the year, begin closing the technological gap between Earth and a galaxy that had, until last week, no idea this planet existed at all. And Wanda Maximoff, who had spent Central Park's aftermath wondering whether her power made her more monster than hero, emerged from the conflict's final battle with something she'd never quite possessed before. Not less power, but a relationship to it built on her own terms rather than borrowed fear. But the true and lasting change was smaller than any of that, and stranger. It lived in a friendship between a masked teenager and an exhausted paramedic who'd met amid falling debris and kept finding each other in the chaos that followed, proof, if anyone needed it, that the fight underneath the fight. The one Steve had named on the war's second night mattered as much as any battle fought in the sky. It lived in an alliance between Avengers and Wakandans that had begun as tactical necessity and ended as something closer to kinship. It lived in the quiet, permanent knowledge held by everyone who'd stood in that park that Earth's next test, and there would be a next test, Vader had promised as much, would not find them scrambling to organize from nothing. The Empire withdrew, but it did not disappear. Somewhere above the reach of any sensor Earth currently possessed, a fleet regrouped, a commander filed a report that would not sit comfortably on any desk it reached, and an emperor who had come looking for a curiosity found instead a problem considerably more interesting than conquest, a world whose defiance had earned it something no newly contacted planet in Imperial history had ever received: personal attention from the highest levels of a galaxy-spanning throne. And in the ruins of a Central Park still smoking from war, an 18-year-old boy in a red and blue mask sat beside a paramedic who'd refused to run, watched a fleet of alien ships vanish into hyperspace above a city that had somehow impossibly held, and allowed himself, for the first time in a very long week, to simply feel something other than fear. Earth had met an empire. Earth had bled for the privilege of standing its ground. And Earth, battered but unbroken, had made something unmistakably clear to a galaxy that had never once considered it worth watching. This was not a world that would be conquered quietly. The fleet was gone. The war was not over. Something worse than the Galactic Empire was already, somewhere out among those hyperspace lanes, beginning to take notice. With great power comes great responsibility. More stories await.